about 3 months ago in May of 2020, we hosted an Ask the Experts live event. I don't know if any of you were able to tune into that, but essentially the goal was to essentially raise some funds for the CDC Foundation and their battle against coronavirus. So I decided to invite a bunch of MVPs and experts from the Microsoft side, the product team members, to come on board and answer questions live. And obviously, the idea was to answer the questions from the people tuning in and be able to ask, on YouTube or whatever they were watching, ask a question and get someone from Microsoft, from the leadership at Microsoft, to answer that. And it was pretty successful. So we had Charles Samana attending, Ryan Jones, Matt Barber, and a bunch of other MVPs as well. Now, when I was trying to put that together, one of the biggest challenges is that, the invitation was open to all MVPs, and MVPs are global, right? We're all over the world. So trying to come up with a time during the day that works for everyone, because I wanted to make sure this was a live event so we can answer questions on the fly and whatnot. It was pretty challenging. So I ended up settling for, late afternoon on the Eastern time zone in the US, which is essentially, like around noon or so on the West Coast where Microsoft is located. I wanted to make sure the people in Seattle, Redmond, Bellevue, like all that area where Microsoft is located, were able to log in and join during, midday for them. And also it was kind of late in the morning for a lot of countries as well, and super early in the morning for others as well. I think it was around 5 a.m. or so in Australia. So you can imagine my surprise when Amey Holden decided to sign up to be at the event. I was shocked that someone would, and I think it was like, during a weekday or maybe it was Saturday for her or something like that. I need to go back and check, but I was shocked to see Amey, volunteering, because there was nothing in it for her other than helping out again, raise some funds for the foundation. So, I was blown away by then. I got to meet her, during that live event, and then during some other calls, we the MVPs get together, whoever can do it, on Friday afternoons typically. And we just talk about, how if challenges our work and just personal lives and news and things like that, and celebrate victories together, and kind of help each other in other areas. But anyway, the point is, I got to know Amey, virtually over the last couple of months, and one of the things I learned from her is, again, her relentlessness to get involved and learn things and get better at everything she does. And she started her business applications career way, recently than most of us on the MVP side. I started back in 2006, for example. Amey started in 2016. But when you talk to her, it looks like she's been doing it for 20 years or so. So I've learned a couple things from Amey. One of them, which you will hear during the introduction, is she calls herself, I'm an ABC consultant, and I'm not going to spoil it, what that is or what that means. But I never heard that before until she told me that she was an ABC consultant. But the other thing I learned from her is that, she is really good at kind of putting together lessons learned along the way. And after talking to her for a while, I said, you really should put together an episode for the CRM MVP podcast that teaches people, the things that you've learned along the way, kind of best practices and whatnot. Because I know that a lot of people that have been on the business applications have been working with Dynamics 365, Power Apps, Power Platform, CDS, etc. for several years now. I know that there's a lot of people also that are just starting, or maybe they have been working with it within the last year or 2 years or whatever it is. And I think that lessons that come from her can really help a lot of people out there. So Amey's here. She's going to be hosting the episode. I just wanted to give you kind of a quick intro on why, I felt that she has so much to add into the show, and I hope she's back hosting another one. But she is. I wanted to make sure that you'll be hearing more from Amey going forward. And by the way, if you enjoyed this episode, Amey and Neil Benson also have their own show in which they kind of analyze and suggest improvements for people's LinkedIn profiles. I should probably have mine analyzed. Here's the thing. The reason why I haven't done it, and I know Neil and Amy are going to listen to this, the reason why I haven't done it is because I have a pretty old picture on my LinkedIn, like most people. 90% of people have like a really old picture on my LinkedIn. And it's not because I want to look younger or whatever. I'm pretty visible. Like if you're a member of our YouTube channel, you know that I'm like in almost every video. It's not like I'm hiding the way I look right now. I don't really care. The only reason why I haven't updated my picture is because I don't have a professional picture. Like I would have to update it, Jerry Weinstock style to a picture of me on a boat or something like that. And I don't want to do that. So the last time I took like an actual, like I walked into a place with a suit and said like, hey, I need some professional pictures done or whatever that was in something like 2013 or something. So it's been a long time. I have to do it again. I don't want to deceive people to believe that I'm still wearing glasses and I still weigh, 50 pounds less or 50 less pounds or whatever. That's not what I'm trying to do. I want to update it, but I know that they're probably going to spend 5 minutes just talking about that and telling everyone that they have, told me that 1,000 times. All true, by the way. Every time I see Neil, it's like, hey, are you going to update that picture or what? I know he's trying to help me, but I feel like I know it's coming, and that's one of the reasons why I haven't submitted my LinkedIn profile to be analyzed. But you know what? I'll do it. I know that that's coming, but I'm curious to see what else they can find, how else I can improve my LinkedIn profile, and I strongly suggest for all of you listening to this to go tune in. I will drop a link below to that, to their show, so you can go ahead and check it out. They've analyzed a few MVPs and other professionals out there as well. And I'm also gonna drop a link to that Ask the Expert session, so you can see Amy and also how kind of the day progresses. Like when she starts, it's like dark, right? It's like 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning. I don't know what time it is at that time, but it's like dark outside and right around the end of the stream, which is 3 hours long. So if you can watch the whole thing, I mean, I feel like I should give you an award of some kind. But if you watch the whole thing, you will see how by the end of it, everything is just beautiful and birds chirping outside and the sun is out. It's beautiful in Australia, wherever Amy lives. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Amy, who will talk about her top 10 things she wishes she knew when she started her business applications career. Take it away.
Welcome to the CRM MVP podcast. My name is Amey Holden, and I'll be your host for this episode. Today we're going to look at 10 things I wish I knew earlier in my business applications career. And by business applications, I mean Microsoft Business Applications. So who on earth am I? I am a Power Platform customer experience specialist. I'm also lots of other things. I'm also a business applications MVP. I'm also an ABC consultant. By ABC, I mean anything but code. I live in Australia, where every day is a holiday, and I started my Power Platform career around 6 years ago now. And to put it nicely, the Power Platform life chose me as I landed in my first day at IBM as a technical consultant and got assigned to the Microsoft service line. Turns out there's more to Microsoft than just spreadsheets. So I'm going to start the show with a bit of a story. It's called Bob's Party. Everyone loves Bob's parties. Even before you got there, you knew it was going to be great. Bob would always ring you the day before to check you were still coming and to make sure you knew that you could bring someone with you if you wanted to. Bob would always greet you at the door with a big smile and introduce you to everyone in the room before leaving you to talk to someone who had similar interests. Not only did Bob manage to pay attention to me, but he also managed to spread himself around the group. I was amazed at the wide variety of people Bob attracted to his parties. His parents and their friends were always there, and there were always plenty of children crawling through adults' legs. He always got a DJ. He managed to keep everyone happy, One minute we were dancing to Rock Around the Clock, and the next I was singing to my favourite new release. I watched Bob at parties and was always amazed that he was in the moment and focused on whoever he was with. Bob was not a host who was always looking over the shoulder of the guests. Nothing ever seemed to be too much trouble for Bob. If you needed something, a drink, anything, he had an uncanny talent for anticipating your needs and turning up just as you were about to try and find whatever you needed. At Bob's parties, everyone felt special. Bob certainly held awesome parties. He seemed to get a real thrill out of seeing everyone else have a good time. So number 1 on the list is be more like Bob. So that story came from a group exercise instructor training class, but it's something I relate to a lot in life, work, and play, even today. This was years ago. I once shared the story with a customer as well, and he also, every time I met with him, he brings it up, still to this day. And I think there's something in it that anyone can learn from, whether you're being a group exercise instructor, a consultant, a mum, a dad, just a person. I think there's a lot to take from that story, and I try and take it with me wherever I go. So my first one on the list is to be more like Bob. Every time you run a workshop, every time you're in a meeting, every time you have a conversation with someone, imagine you're running Bob's party. How do you make people feel welcome? How do you make sure you anticipate their needs? And how do you make everyone leave that interaction, whether it's a party, a meeting, a 5-minute conversation at the coffee machine? How do you make them leave feeling good, feel like they've had a great time, and feel like they're connected with you? Number 2. For number 2, I'm going to tell you something. That Bob does not know everything. And no one knows everything. And often people don't know what they're actually doing. It's hard to believe sometimes, but actually we're all making it up as we go along. And I know there's that cliche saying, fake it till you make it. I don't quite believe in that, but I do believe that it's okay to not know everything. And it's okay to be honest, and you don't have to beat yourself up because you don't know everything. Things are always changing, as we know with the Power Platform, and you've got to go with the flow. And you're always changing. Everything's always changing. And it's okay that you don't know everything. 100% that is completely okay. Number 3. For number 3, I'm going to tell you something else. Asking for help does not make you stupid. People are always quite afraid to reach out and ask for help. And I do it myself. I still do to this day. I try not to. You will struggle and beat yourself up about something, convince yourself you're stupid, convince yourself it's not possible. But actually, it's amazing that eventually when you crack and you realize, right, I need to ask for help, you realize you wish you'd done it so much sooner. The other thing I found from asking for help is that people love to be asked for help, to give you help. Do you know why? It's basically a massive compliment. Think about a time when someone asked you for help. How did it make you feel? Because for me, when someone asks me for help, it makes me feel good that they look up to me, they respect what I do, and they see me as an expert, so my ego loves that. It's hard to remember when you're in the other shoes of asking for help, though. And I have created some really amazing relationships from reaching out to people to ask for help. And what's the worst thing that they could say if you ask them for help? No, sorry, I don't know. And quite often it'll send them off to go and look themselves. There is also, alluding to a previous podcast which Gus did on the show, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And if you think it's a stupid question, ask it anyway, because it's almost definitely not a stupid question. And that comes from the book Business Think, I believe, but I'll try and find out which podcast that comes from. But the long and short is, if you got a question, ask, reach out for help, and there is nothing shameful about asking for help. On number 4, I love this one. I tell people it a lot. I tell it to myself every day. You can do anything, but you cannot do everything. So let's look at that in the context of the Power Platform. It's absolutely, completely, and utterly huge. So you could do anything in it. You could do absolutely anything, but you cannot, well, some people might want to prove me wrong. You cannot do all of it. You can't be a Power Apps expert and a Power Automate expert and be a Power BI pro. And in your spare time, when you're not breathing or eating, you also specialize in Dynamics 365 customer service. And you know every single detail about every single app that's ever been made by Microsoft from the last 40 years. It's not going to happen. It's okay to choose an area. So choose an area that you are. So sometimes it's that you can choose an area, and sometimes the area chooses you. And quite often you become the expert of the area that your project is currently looking at. And that's okay. But if there's an area that really excites you and really interests you, then go with that one, because people like doing things that they're good at or they find interesting. There's no point in you slogging yourself to understand Power BI, for example, when you really hate charts and data and it doesn't excite you. I get it, you've got to do it for your project, for example, but get it done, learn what you need to. You might find something in it that you like, but if you have the choice, you don't need to know it all. It also reminds me of a recent post by Joel Lindstrom around, are you an app person or a flow person? There's not many people that do both. Questions around why or how, and yes, of course you can do both, but people often find that you tend to specialize in one rather than the other. And that's exactly what I'm trying to get across here. You could do all of it, but you can't, no, you can do any of it, but you cannot do all of it. Number 5. This is quite an interesting one for me. And there's going to be another story. I freaking love stories. So this was a story that one of my friends told me. And again, it's one of those things that's really resonated with me, and it comes up in and out of life all the time. And it's called Good News, Bad News. It's an old Chinese story about a rice farmer. He lives a very simple life. He had a small home and a few children and a small field of rice. He had just enough to provide for his family. And one day, a herd of wild horses came running through the village and ran into his rice field and got stuck in the mud, and they couldn't get away, so they were his. His neighbour came running over and said, "This is good news, such good fortune. You are rich, this is amazing." And the rice farmer said, "Good news, bad news. Who knows?" And a few weeks later, his son, that was 12 years old, decided to jump on one of the wild horses for a ride. And very shortly, the wild horse throws him off and he breaks his leg. The neighbour comes running over and says, "Oh no, this is such bad news." And the farmer said, "Good news, bad news. Who knows?" A week later, a Chinese general is marching through his village with the army to go to war. And on this march to war, going through the villages, they would take every boy that was over 10 years old that was healthy. So they took every boy in the village that was healthy, except his son, because he had a broken leg. The neighbour comes running over and says, "Yes, this is wonderful news. How lucky are we?" And the father replies, "Good news, bad news. Who knows?" And that is the end of the story. But that is how the dance is. Who knows? It took me a while to process this one, but I really like it. So what this means for me in context of my business applications career. It's really important to remember that if something goes wrong, if something bad happens, so you really stuff up a demo. It's a big demo you've been prepping for weeks, and you stuff it up. Does that mean that you have had a bad hour? Or does that mean you've had a bad day? Or does that mean you've had a bad week? or does it spiral and become a bad month? It's really important to remember that bad things are going to happen, but they don't need to ruin the rest of it. So, what I like to do at the end of each day, which I got one of my housemates into doing, it's called the daily highlight and low light. But you've got to start with the low light. At the end of the day, we'd have a little catch up, and everyone would have to come around with their low light and highlight for the end of the day. It's really interesting because you start on the low light, you start on the bad thing, and quite often it's hard to think of. Like you'll come home and be like, oh, I've had a terrible day. But actually, you think about it and you're like, what was the low light? And you're like, oh, well, I did this presentation, it didn't go very well, but it wasn't that bad. And you go through all these lows, and eventually you'll find one that you've decided is your all-time low, and you'll share that. But then's the rule. You've got to come up with a highlight. And it is impossible to not come up with a highlight. It might be the smallest thing, like someone bought me a coffee at the coffee shop today. I found $1 on the floor. Or it could be a really amazing thing that you'd actually already forgotten about because you did a terrible presentation this morning and you forgot about all the great things that happened after that. The fact you had an awesome meeting with your manager, you got a pay rise, or you had all green lights on the drive home. Do you know what I mean? So I think the really important thing to remember here is things are going to be bad sometimes, but they're also going to be good. Also, it's interesting to know that psychologically we are designed to remember bad things better than we remember good things. It's survival instinct for humans to remember the bad things so that you learn for survival for the future. We are terrible at remembering good things. And I think it's a really good thing to remind yourself of at the end of a day, end of a crappy day, end of a rubbish meeting. Remind yourself that this is a low light, but there will be a highlight. I told you it would get fluffy. I hope you're all still holding in. Number 6. This one follows on really nicely from 5, that there will be highlights and lowlights. Number 6 is that you're good. You learn best by failing. So, what does that mean? Well, if you never got anything wrong, then you wouldn't know what was right. And sometimes you have to actually fail. And sometimes you have to very closely fail and fear the risk of failing. Because that's normally the bit that's scarier than the failure. It's the fear of the failure. And I always have this line in my head. It kind of works, but kind of doesn't. It's always, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. So what it's saying is, if I fail once, I don't know how this is going to go. So if I fail once, then it's my fault. But then if I fail again, then I've not learned from my mistakes. And then it's embarrassing. And then it becomes embarrassing to everyone, not just to yourself. If you consistently make the same mistakes, that is not learning. That is failing and being sloppy. But if you make a mistake and you learn from it, you pick yourself up, you're coming off good and you're learning. And I find the best way for me to learn lessons sometimes is just to really stuff things up. Because you will remember that, because that's that bad experience and you're going to remember it and you won't do it again. But if you never let yourself get to the point where you're at risk of failing or failing, then it's going to be harder to learn those lessons because there's no lessons to be learned. Well, there is some, but less significant, prominent ones. So it's really important that you do this kind of failure with the right support around you. So it's really important that you can have people that trust you, that give you the space to possibly fail, even though they know you probably won't, and that you will bounce back from it. And you've got to just sit there and think, I know this sounds really cliche, and what's the worst that could happen? And if you actually sit down and write down what's the worst thing that could happen, you realize that it's really not worth all the worry and the fear that you're putting into it. And quite often, you realize it's really not a big deal. The failure or the fear of failure leaves the building and you actually end up going and smashing it. But it is absolutely terrifying running your first workshop. Your brain will tell you you're probably going to stuff it up, and hey, you might, but you got it out of the way. Number 7. This is inspired by my recent endeavor of growing herbs. Okay, so be more like the oak tree, not like the cress. I sound like a nut job, right? So this is all about you've got to be in it for the long run. So think of the oak tree. It's strong, it's sturdy, it's solid. It's going to be around for a long time. Cress, it's absolutely incredible. It grows at such incredible rapid speed, but then it's dead and shriveled in 10 days' time. Be more like the oak tree. And this is about being consistent and patient. So earlier in my career, I felt like I did one amazing thing and no one noticed. Or I did this amazing thing, but hey, I'm still not a famous rock star. Like, what's going on? Like, I'm a millennial and I get a buzz from instant gratification. It's really hard to just sit back and do the hard work and just be consistent. So when you combine consistency and patience, it's a very hard combination to master, but when you do, you will realize that all of a sudden you just keep plowing on, you do your consistent things, you do them well, and you're patient, and you will realize the good things start to come to you. Also, there is the instant gratification of being a one-hit wonder, but it's only the there and then that's going to be satisfying. In the long term, it's going to be a flash in the pan. You might remember it a few months down the line, but you probably won't. And it's all about with things like, for example, contributing to the community. People are like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. Just start. Because that one article that you write, that first one that you spent 8 months talking about doing and couldn't decide what to do, that's not going to be your ultimate contribution. You're going to learn as you go. You're going to get better, and you're going to get known for being consistent and being patient. And I think the saying here that always rings true in my head is work hard in silence and let your success speak for itself. So obviously you've got to put your contributions out there, but you've also got to let people find it in their own time. Do not shove it down people's throats. No one likes a massive show off. And it's about finding that balance between really showing off, being proud of your work, and not actually doing anything to contribute in the first place. The flip side of that is that if you're scared of putting something out there because you're like, oh, what's the point? No one will care. Firstly, the act of you putting it out there is a way of you solidifying your learning. Because for you to know something is one thing, to teach it to others or share it with others really solidifies and teaches you things. And secondly, if that article or that blog or that video you post helps one person, then that's one more person than who you've helped from doing nothing. And I'm still going through this myself. Sometimes you do things you're like, what's the point in this? Nobody cares. Put it out there. You'll learn something from it. And as long as it's actually a valuable contribution to something, to you, to anything, then put it out there. Do it consistently, be patient, and slowly but surely the snowball effect will kick in and you will be making a difference. Okay, number 8. Again, follows on nicely from 7 about being consistent and patient. This one is, it's all about the people. Now, another cliche saying I don't like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. To some extent, it's kind of true. But what I mean by this is that you need to create a good support. You need a good support network. And some people are lucky that they tend to come across it quite easily. They get put in a good job and they get put with a good manager and they've got a great team and it's all wonderful. And sometimes that just doesn't happen. But that doesn't mean that you're destined to have a terrible team around you and no support. So go and find it. You're not a tree. You can move. So go and find that support. But like I said, people love to help and people love to help others. Everyone's got something to talk about and learn. That's why I'm here waffling about this kind of stuff. I've got something that I've learned and I hope I can help other people. But sometimes people don't have channels to express that, or you don't know where they've expressed that. So reach out to people and ask them for help and build that support network that you need. The two or three important people that you need. You need someone, this might be one person, it might be five, it might be two. You need someone who's going to inspire you, someone that you look up to and go, I want to be a bit like them. I want to be a bit, and it might be five different people, and there's something about each of them that inspires you, and that's what you need. You need some people to help you, and you also need some people to believe in you. So for me, I have been lucky along the way to get these people. I've had people early in my career who've created safe spaces for me on projects that have allowed me to take a risk and maybe fail. And they've ensured me that if anything goes wrong, it's on them, it's not on me. And I'm pretty sure 100% of the time, nothing went wrong. I learned some stuff and it went great. But when it did go wrong, it was okay. I was protected and I was safe. You also need people who believe in you. And another one for me is someone that believed in me to start doing more public speaking and more posting. Sometimes we found it hard to believe in ourselves, and it's really good to have someone else just give you a little bit of kick, to give you support, to encourage you, to be your cheerleader. And then you also need that person that's not afraid to give you a kick in the ass when you need it. I like to call it tough love. And it's not okay to do it in massively strong doses, but sometimes you just need a kick up the ass from someone you love and trust. And it's really important to have those kind of people in your life, in your career, and specifically for me, in my business applications career, 100%. That brings us to number 9. Oh, this I am still learning this. Okay. So the saying goes, are you really listening or are you just waiting to speak? And I am an absolute sucker for it. So you think about it. You're sat in a meeting. Someone said something. They're still talking, but you've already formulated in your head what your response is. So you don't actually realize the rest of what you're saying. You are just waiting for their lips to stop moving or the noise to stop coming out their mouth so you can say what you want to say. And to some extent, it's okay that you've got ideas of what you want to say. But I often found myself, especially earlier on in my career, I was very much, yep, I know this, and you switched off from the rest of the sentence because you've made an assumption. You've perhaps not even waited for them to stop speaking. And that's just a whole even worse level. The people that I've found most interesting and inspirational are those people that will let you speak, say the whole thing, and they will happily pause. You can see them thinking, and then they respond. And what comes out their mouth 90% of the time is absolute gold. And that's because they are listening, they are not waiting to speak. It's a really hard thing to do, and it feels awkward, and it feels strange, and sometimes it comes across even weirder when you're in Microsoft Teams or your audio conferencing vehicle of choice, and people go, can you still hear me? Are you connected? But we get the premise that you need to listen to what people are saying before you decide what you're going to say. And it's much harder than you actually think. And we're going to wrap up with number 10. And this is something I learned from a big project that I did, which was basically the first 2.5 years of my business applications career. It was a massive transformational project. It was a difficult customer. It was a difficult project. And it was a baptism of fire, some might say, into the business applications and technical consulting world. And it was something my manager told me, which after 2 years of stress and sleepless nights, solved a lot of problems. He told me, Amey, it's just a piece of technology. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be passionate. I'm not saying you shouldn't care. But you need to make sure that you don't take things too personally. And if a project fails, it does not mean you are a failure of a person. It does not mean you are a bad person. If the project is going bad, it does not mean your life is bad. It's great to be passionate. It's great to care about how the project does. And that's so important because you can tell the difference between a consultant or someone who doesn't care and someone who does care. But you've got to draw that line. One thing I have to remind myself quite often is this line: it's just a piece of technology. The other thing that comes away with this is that if this was easy, it wouldn't be a project. And what I mean by that is quite often we're engaged with projects and we've got to work on something. We've got to work out how we can use our business applications tools to solve problems. If it was easy, someone would have solved the problem already, but it's not. And there's a difference between a task and a project. A task is something that's clearly got an instruction, you crack on and you do it. A project, it's big, it's complex, it's got multiple moving parts. It's not simple, it's complex. And it's sometimes really important to remember that although it's important to the customer to be successful, and it also, I hope it's important to you for the project to be successful. But at the end of the day, no one is going to die. And sometimes you have just got to, in the wise words of Elsa from Frozen, let it go. One other thing I remind myself of is of my friend, someone I spoke to who is an accountant. And his advice to me, or his advice that he lived by, was an accountant, just leave the month behind you. And that's what they do. They do the month, they do the accounts, they wrap it up, and they leave the month behind them. And sometimes we've got to remember to do that as well. And I think that wraps up my top 10 things I wish I'd known earlier in my business applications career. I still, this day, remind myself about them all the time. Some days I'm better at it than others, and some days I absolutely suck. And I'm sat there crying about a piece of a bad project, speaking over people, struggling in a corner, not asking people for help, trying to do everything all at once, and being impatient because only 5 people liked my article this week. Dude, we're only human. So, what have I got to say now? At the end, I've got to remind you, if you have any questions or comments for the episode, you can leave a comment in the show note, oh gosh, 1 second, I need to follow my instructions. Any comments or questions for the episode, leave a comment on the website, which is crmmvppodcast.com, or send an email to info@crmmvppodcast.com. I want to say a massive thank you to Gus for having me along to host this episode of the CRM MVP podcast. I've really enjoyed being here. I hope you've all taken away something. If nothing else, my awesome stories have amused you a little bit today. I'm going to wrap it up there. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, my name is Amey Holden. It's spelled Amey. Thanks to my parents. Apparently it was in the Marks and Spencer's baby book of 1992. But you can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I don't have any cool aliases. I'm just Amey Holden, spelled wrong. I also have a website, so feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to know what you think. I'd love to hear if you have any to add or your thoughts on some things that I've said. And don't forget, be more like Bob. Stay safe, guys.